Today's conversation sits right at the intersection of something we're all navigating, but very few people truly understand: the relationship between technology, mental health, and human connection. And now, with AI accelerating everything, we're not just asking how technology impacts us, but what it's turning us into. My guest today, Susan Reynolds, has been studying this long before it became part of the mainstream conversation. Starting as an educator in the early days of the internet, she witnessed firsthand how technology began reshaping how young people think, connect, and show up in the world. She's now the founder of LookUp, a social impact organization tackling digital addiction and empowering the next generation to build a healthier, more intentional relationship with technology. What I really love about Susan's work is that it doesn't just highlight the problem, it creates space for real solutions, often coming directly from the young people living in it every day. In this episode, we're going to unpack the promise and peril of technology, from the early days of the internet to today's AI-driven world, what's really happening with youth mental health, and how we can use tools like AI in a way that actually gives us more human connection, not less. This is a powerful, timely, and honestly necessary conversation. Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I woke up really excited this morning to have this conversation. It's so top of mind for so many people, thankfully, because it is absolutely something that needs to be continually discussed and solutions created. And you are part of that solution. Tell everyone, before we dig into LookUp specifically, tell everyone about your journey that brought you there.
Okay. Yeah. So I started as a seventh and eighth grade English and social studies teacher back in 1986 when there was absolutely no technology, no internet, no phones, no social media. When I think back on how I even created curriculum, taking pages out of books and Xeroxing them and creating little packets of different information so that students really could analyze different sources and compare. But just thinking back about the difference of creating and teaching at that time. So that was 1986. And in 1997, there was a big explosion, and it was almost a race to get technology into the classroom, a big push for one-to-one computers, one-to-one iPads when those came out. So it was really sort of jumping in. Schools really jumped in feet first, dove into it, spent the money. What happened in my school was the headmaster hired a director of technology, expecting him to wire the school, so set up all the computers and the internet, write the tech plan, the plan for the school over 1, 5, and 10 years, train the teachers, and help them integrate the curriculum using technology. And when we look back on it now, that was way too big a task for one person. And so the really humorous thing, and this is when I look back, almost 30 years now, the headmaster came to me mostly because I was using technology in the classroom, but it was the Oregon Trail CD-ROM. Right? A simulation, nothing to do with the internet, nothing to do with an overarching theme. But I was a social scientist and I did really love researching. So I dove into it. And the irony in just thinking about where we've come from, I said, well, what the headmaster wanted me to do was write the tech plan, make a map for the school. So I went to Michael, who was the director of technology, and I asked him, I said, well, how am I supposed to write this tech plan? I'm going to take this off your plate. And he said, just go on the internet. And I literally said, what is the internet? And, he sort of looked at me
Like,
where are you
you're
coming
the
from?
writing the tech plan? Yeah.
Exactly. And he explained it and he said, just go to the Columbia Institute of Learning Technologies and read a bunch of different plans. And, you can modify it for this is the Fenn School in Concord, Mass. So I went on the internet and, the first thing that happened to me was I felt my brain speed up. I also got very excited about the way the internet was formulated in an idea and a hyperlink out. So almost in a mind map fashion, which is how I created curriculum with physical books and physical articles. So I dove into the research. It was fascinating to me. John Tapscott wrote a book called Growing Up Digital in 1995. And this is really where I coined the term the promise and peril of technology, because he was talking about it in 1995, particularly for youth and the power of the internet, right? And the real promise of it, but also the peril. And he was predicting internet addiction and time on the internet replacing human connection. While he was also saying, the fact in schools where you could have a pen pal in another country and learn, through that human connection about another culture. So, I became fascinated with this idea, worked on curriculum and training the teachers. But the big thing I noticed once AOL IM came out, so instant messaging, which is, when you think about it, if you were on AOL IM, it was in the top right hand corner of your screen, and you could have all these different conversations going at the same time. You could say, be right back. So what I noticed was all of the students were now doing their homework with this social conversation piece going on. And I noticed, and this is probably around 2000, I noticed my students were more distracted. They weren't necessarily getting their homework done. Some of the parents were complaining that homework was taking too long, as if it was too much homework. But I, very quickly assessed that no, I think that what's happening is that it's constantly interrupted. And a really interesting thing for me was I decided to just have conversations on IOL, IM, and like almost having office hours as a teacher, answering questions and sort of being available. But what I noticed about myself is this was incredibly addictive, right? I mean, it was enticing for some reason. And so I think that frames for us what I began to see with my students. And I left teaching in 2006, so right as the iPhone was coming out. So I didn't really have a sense of what impact at that time it was going to have, but I had this framework built. And what then ended up happening is sort of moved over, spent more time at home, sort of cut back my workload, but I became a yoga and mindfulness teacher. And I noticed in myself that while I am teaching yoga and presence and mindfulness, right, and focusing on the present moment, when I would get on my phone, it was the exact opposite, right? I wasn't really in the space that I was in. I was in conversations, especially with a daughter that was very, very anxious. So I realized very quickly that in my responding to her anxiety, I was not helping her solve it on her own. And I mentioned that, and this is probably around 2010, 2011. And I mention it because we really now move forward to talking about creating resiliency, right, in our youth, and being able to manage emotions and feelings on one's own and not having that constant reinforcement. And that just the nature of the technology speeds up conversations. It makes things more reactive rather than thoughtful. And so all of this I was seeing along my journey. But I think it was in 2014. So I was teaching yoga and mindfulness. I wasn't teaching school, and I read a sentence that said, from the Stanford provost, college students have never been more anxious, depressed, isolated, lonely. And, and then it got into self-harming and even thoughts of suicide. And that was shocking to me. I sort of had not been aware that there was this growing mental health crisis. And as I dove into that research, very few people at that time were talking about the impact of technology. There was disagreement among, professors of whether it was a correlative or causative issue. So in looking at 2014, so 12 years ago, where there was no consensus. And another really interesting thing, right, in looking at this longevity is Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Anxious Generation in 23, I think, which is now, an international bestseller and really a blueprint. He's really turned the page on raising awareness about the impact of technology on youth. But he was saying all of these same things in 2014, but he was in the minority of professors, of academicians who were trying to were making this correlation that it was causative, but it was not agreed with. So it's been a very interesting, sort of two chunks of it from 97 to 2014, sort of happenstance.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2014, when I realized how severe this mental health crisis was, that's really when I took on this work.
So in 2014, when you sort of had that epiphany, is that when you said, was it a conscious decision, like, I want to build a solution to this? Or were you just kind of fascinated by the concept and going down the road and seeing where it led at that point?
Well, I was fascinated, and I was fascinated by the two things. One, that the sentence from the Stanford provost just sort of shook me up.
Mm.
But the other thing was in watching my own behavior around technology, I started to research, digital addiction. And then I started digital addiction in mental health. But then I also started to research digital addiction, mindfulness as an antidote to this digital distraction. Let's
Mm-hmm.
call it digital distraction. And so, no, it started really almost a tongue-in-cheek blog called Confessions of a Tech Addicted Yogi, as I tried to do things and pay attention and notice my own behaviors. And one of the first ones was realizing how many of us were texting and driving and how hard it was to just intentionally put the phone down. So I used to lock it in the glove compartment. And that was like, what is this? Like, what is it about this machine that is creating so much connection and inability to sort of regulate one's use? And I think I took on more and more topics and sort of wrote it was March 2014. And I just decided I was going to write a blog a day and stumbled upon some youth organizations that were working on solving it. One of them, a really early youth organization, was called Text Less, Live More. And it was created by friends of a young woman. Her name is Merritt Levitin, who was killed by a texting driver on a group biking trip. So that was my first inclination that that understood the problem and were trying to solve it.
So take us from there then to the actual inception of LookUp.
So, sort of very typical of an adult, right? So I started researching, created presentations, started with presentations to parents and teachers, sort of educating them about what was happening for youth. And then somebody said, why don't you come into the classroom? And, I taught for 20 years. There should be no issue going into the classroom, right? So I go into the classroom. I was visiting 10th grade psychology classes. I remember it so clearly at Piedmont High School, where I actually went to high school in California. And I was met with such resistance, even to mention we're going to talk about phones and social media. And even though I started with what are all the positive things, there was this barrier that I was an adult, who looked like their mom and was going to take their phone away. And so
what year was that? Did you say
that was 2014?
2014.
That was 2014 as well. And so I didn't like it. I didn't like going into these classrooms because I had never experienced that kind of reaction to content. And then I really realized that this was a different issue. Imagine teachers could, talk about climate change, right? And things we need to change, but there's no generational rub there. Unless the younger generation is blaming the older generation for creating this problem that they now have to solve. But I continued to work with adults. I taught yoga and mindfulness to teenagers and talked a little bit about the impact the technology was having on them. And that was a little easier, but it was really, I met a young woman and she really wanted to create her own digital detox for a week. And this was in 2018. And she said, but I don't want to do it alone. I want to do it with all my friends. So we talked about this and we called it the LookUp Challenge. And, she was a family friend. And so I helped her with information. And she came back and she said, my friends won't do it. And I said, well, why not? And she said, they're too afraid. They're too afraid to go off social media for a week. And that was one of those aha moments where it was like, well, no wonder as adults, it is so hard to teach youth about this because we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
especially in this sense of just put your phone down. And they explained to me that, Susan, we have had our Instagram account since we were in sixth grade. So it's part of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of who we are. And if we're not there, then we're missing out. So that was, a lot of the fear of missing out came from social media. And it was too, I mean, that was the fear of it. Because if somebody's, at that time had said, when it, and it was really, what was it at that point? I mean, Instagram, it was Instagram. Not as many adults were on Instagram at that time. It was Facebook maybe. And I wouldn't have been scared to go off. Maybe it might have been annoyed and
Mm-hmm.
found it difficult and, experienced a little bit of FOMO, but it wasn't scary. And so, I worked with Juliet, and we modified this challenge where you could spend time away from your phone. Like you could sleep without your phone, or you could choose that when you're with a group of friends, you're not on you're all not on your phones. And her friends were more amenable to that. It was a real eye opener on how this is more than just, an electronic piece of equipment. I mean, it is really an extension
Language. Mm-hmm.
of who they are. And that was early on. That was 2018. And by 2019, I was really lucky. I was speaking to the director of the Entrepreneurship Center at Dartmouth College, where I went, and, talking about this issue and talking about what he was seeing. And he said, we give founders grants to students who have an entrepreneurial idea. So we could do that around this issue. And at the time, also, we had been talking about the design thinking model, which is where you take a problem and how might we solve for and go through this ideation process. And one of the professors at Dartmouth ran a class on this. And so we were able to run what we called a design-a-thon around this issue in 2019. And that's really where we were born. They had so many ideas on how to, change their relationship to technology, improve youth mental health. And it was things that, we wouldn't even come up with. That was the foundation of it. Again, this is 2019, so everything was in person. It took a while to find some other universities that would do this as well. We found two, University of Arizona and San Diego University. So we had, let's see, we had 6 grantees, 2 from each university. We had it all planned. We were bringing them to Black Rock in San Francisco to hold a symposium with adults in the field. We had mentors that we were setting them up with, and you can imagine what's coming, right? The symposium was set for April 2020. So that's when we did what everybody else did, right? Is we just went online and figured that out. And for us, that made it so much easier because we had so much more access to so many more students. And the interesting thing is, though, still in 2019, even when we ran this design-a-thon, we sort of had to frame that there was an actual problem, and then the students would research it and have these aha moments of seeing the connection between technology and mental health. And if we fast forward to today, everybody knows it, right? I mean, so it's just that rapid movement of, the increased awareness,
Mm-hmm.
as well as a desire by a lot of young people to change their relationship with technology. And so many say, I wish we grew up without it. I wish we didn't have it. But the problem with it is, right, nobody can have it. Even if one person has it, then, it changes the whole structure of it.
Yeah, it's sort of ironic that you were trying to hold this in-person gathering to talk about technology and then had to rely on the technology in order to have the gathering,
Exactly.
in order to make that happen. Initially, you were working with college students.
Yes.
And is it still mostly college students or younger students as well?
So, when we actually created a nonprofit, and it was very, like, the timing was so serendipitous, as bad as the pandemic was for youth, it did just skyrocket the awareness of the issue because everybody was living it now. with no in-person interaction, besides their families, or maybe very small groups of college students with colleges that even stayed open. And so for us, now we know about the problem, but the other really fortuitous event was The Social Dilemma. The documentary came out and raised awareness almost in a very frightening way of the problems of social media for youth mental health, right? For governments, for racial bias and different types of biases. But we were able to partner with the Social Dilemma Impact Team that was set up after the movie or after the documentary, and they actually partnered with us and publicized our second, what we called an innovation challenge, and that just that changed everything for us, because now people had access to knowing about it. I'm not sure how we would have marketed it actually in those early days, without the Social Dilemma.
That was good, fortuitous timing
Yeah.
for that. Before we move on, this is just kind of a random thing that popped into my head. Early on, you said that, the students, when you were teaching in the classroom, and then that little icon would be up there for the AOLIM, and also how when you first started to research how to set up this tech plan, you felt your brain speed up. So we have this distraction that's happening, and how we, even as adults who are so much more self-aware, not always,
Right.
but tend to be, you felt your own brain speed up. And obviously we can see the connection between this digital bubble that we're living in and anxiousness and a lot of the negative things. But it also made me think of, like, ADHD is such a big topic nowadays,
Right.
and a real thing. But I feel like so many more people, I don't know if it's more just awareness or how much of that is being created by this environment. I myself, as I'm looking at my screen, have 20 tabs open.
Right.
And I don't think that when I was younger and a child and a college student that I would have operated that way. I feel like my brain has even gotten rewired a bit now and has to have 27 different things going on at the same time.
Well, yes. I mean, there's so much brain research about it and so many different pieces of it. I mean, I think one of them is the study of attention, and even having those sound bites of reading one page on a screen where you don't have to stay there, right? You get sidetracked and you can read something that talks about, I don't know, like, let's just say it says the 60 Minutes episode. You can immediately, through the document, click on CBS, 60 Minutes, and go off on a tangent, right? So the technology is set up that way, but it's talking about, especially when we think about videos, the shorter they are, the more dopamine the brain is getting. Brain itself is craving more dopamine and having a much harder time staying on one video. And some students have said to me, it's really painful to have to watch a 15-minute YouTube, right? And so, as an anecdote to that, I don't always remember where I get these snippets of information, but actually watching a 2-hour movie is really good for you, because a 2-hour movie on the TV without a remote, so you can click around.
Mhm.
But that's really good for training the brain. And I think the really scary thing about, sort of this attention economy and the lessening of our ability to focus. And I read about this in 2014, that it was talking about that this ability to stay with content is being pruned away from our brain. And it actually said future generations, and we may be there, will not be able to read War and Peace. Like, they won't have
Wow.
the brain neurons to do that. And I just remember being really shocked by that, and also losing the ability to memorize um, a 10-digit phone number with an area code and a number. And I even watched that with myself, when you have to get the code from your text and remember 6 digits. I've really tried to train myself to be able to do that, and say them out loud. But that's how the brain is changing. Like, if you don't use it, you lose it. And a lot of these things we are losing. I think the key, and what I keep seeing, because you mentioned anxiety, and I just read this, that one of the key things that is being taught and tools we need in this age of anxiety is self regulation. And so, because the anxiety comes from this constant need, right, to be searching for other things. And it goes right back to fight, flight, or freeze, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
still have these primal brains that are looking for the savannah, looking for the tiger on the savannah.
Mm-hmm.
So constantly scanning for danger. And there's so many correlations made. I mean, we haven't talked about social media yet, but I mean, if we think about our youth, they're scanning Instagram for danger in criticism about themselves, or hits of comparison culture where they don't feel as good about themselves as friends or people they're seeing. So I think, learning to self regulate and calm the nervous system has become a big focus of a way to live in this age.
And these changes are happening so rapidly. We're not talking about centuries. We're not even talking about a generation at this point,
No,
even less than a decade. Some of this that you're referring back to isn't even 10 years old at this point. So you have this level of rewiring happening so much faster than our bodies were ever meant and our brains were ever meant to process and adapt to in a healthy way is truly something to be paying attention to. So you, through this chain of events, started to look to the kids who basically that's all they knew because they grew up with it. They've had the
right.
Instagram since sixth grade. What really surprised you the most when you started working with the students directly on this?
What surprised me the most was the youth we work with 18 to 25-year-olds. I mean, absolutely younger students could be doing this work too. It's just a little bit trickier with permissions and
Mm-hmm.
needing parental consent. So we've stayed in the 18 to 25 range, but more organizations are giving high school students opportunities to create solutions. When we started, 2019, we were the only ones doing this. And what's been amazing to see over time is now major foundations, the Melinda Gates Foundation, Archwell, which is Harry and Meghan's foundation, Arthur M. Blank Foundation, Hope Lab, Media Network, they have all created a pooled fund of $3 million to give away to 25 youth organizations working on solving issues around responsible technology. So not just social media and mental health, but the impact of ethical AI and creating a more civics minded youth culture through technology and a lot of advocacy. There's a lot of youth advocacy groups in Washington working with the senators and congresspeople that are very focused on creating change and regulation. So that's been really exciting to see that now we're small. We give $2,500 grants, but we have a place in this as the seed grant that you can get a grant from us without having to be an existing 501c3 or having a fiscal sponsor. So we're really creating a stepping stone for youth and youth leaders and youth organizations that want to stay in this work.
So walk us through a little bit. You give a grant to someone. What would that look like once they take the grant? And then what are they doing from that point on?
So we run the challenge in the fall, and they have a 5-month period with us from January to May. And we introduce the cohort. We give away 8 grants a year, and we bring a cohort them all together to talk about what they're working on and what their solutions are. We give them a mentor, and they will explain to us what they're looking for in a mentor. And what's really interesting is in 19, many of the grantees had an idea and they were just launching an idea. What we're seeing now is youth are coming to us already working on something, already having an organization. So they are leveling up to the next level where they're getting money to either expand or to market their ideas, to bring in more youth for them. So they get this mentor, and then we run them through a program. First of all, how to create the budget, and then we have 1 or 2 sessions a month. We have working sessions where we have open office hours and everybody's on the Zoom, and almost like you were all sitting around a round table in an office, but you're all on Zoom so that you have company working, and but also can ask questions and share. So those are the more impromptu ones. We have alumni come back and talk about, what I wish I'd known, you know, giving advice, a lot of question and answer sessions. And then at the end of the program, we have a showcase where everybody talks about, where they've got from A to B and where they want to go further. And we bring in not only the mentors, but other adults in the field. And several want to go on, apply for more grants, and keep doing the work.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of amazing ideas come out of this over the past few years that you've been working on this. And not to pick a favorite child, so to speak, but is there something that really comes to top of mind that was a really revolutionary idea that one of these young adults has really pushed forward and that you really see making an impact at this point?
So many of them. Some of the documentaries that the students have made have really been powerful. I think the superstar success, tenacious young woman, her name is Maddie Freeman. She created something called nosonovember.org. She had an idea. She was a senior in high school and from Littleton, Colorado. And again, this was 2019, 2020. And several students in her school had taken their lives by suicide. And she had already started working with the school and working on mental health solutions. And she very early came on with the correlation to social media. And she created No November, No Social Media November. And she had run it and she applied for a grant with us. And she wanted to make a documentary with Jeff Orlowski, who is the director of The Social Dilemma, in order to not only publicize No November, but why it was important to do No November. So she did this. Then she went to college. She stayed with it. She applied. We had an alumni grant. She applied for the alumni grant. She was very involved in the Entrepreneurship Center in business as a business major. So she applied for other grants through the University of Colorado. Fast forward to graduating, she got one of these grants it's called Young Futures. It's 3 foundations that come together and they have a topic every 6 months, one of them being loneliness and human connection. Maddie applied for that and Maddie got $2,500 from us and then $5,000 from us, and then she applied for this grant and got $100,000 from this organization called Young Futures. And she's just dynamic and authentic and honest, and she has gone on to get another grant just recently from the Responsible Technology Youth Power Fund, which is the big fund I told you about. Again, probably a $50,000 to $75,000 grant. And then she took on AI and she went back to Young Futures and has a second. She's in another cohort, the AI cohort, for another $100,000.
Wow.
The thing is that she, there were moments of, I want to make this my career. I care so deeply about this. And, she's a success story. She has applied for a lot of grants that she hasn't gotten. So it's a rough road. And if you can believe it, around this topic, it's very competitive to get these grants because so many youth leaders, youth organizations are working on solutions. So they really see what's coming more and more around AI, more and more teaching their peers or younger students ethical AI and what it is and the dangers of it. We're just at the tip of the iceberg of the peril. I think at first everybody was so excited about a chatbot that could be your therapist or an AI companion. And we've seen how detrimental that has become, especially, not regulated.
And I definitely want to dive into the AI component, but I had a couple more thoughts. You often times provide the seed grant, but it sounds like then you're able to help navigate and connect these young adults with the bigger grants. And if they continue down that path and that's where they want to go, you have the ability to help them connect with that. And then early on, you said that it was surprising to you when you took this information back to the classroom, how you were so surprised at the resistance that you were met with. And this was only a decade ago,
Right.
by these students feeling like, oh, don't take this away from me. And there was also such a lack of awareness as to how much of this was connected between these mental health issues and what we were dealing with. Now I think there's a lot more science and studies and data that back a lot of this up. But what are some of the current roadblocks that you're still facing with this awareness?
With the awareness, I think, I'm not in the classroom, so I am working directly with the youth leaders. So the roadblocks I find for them can be burnout, actually, and realizing they are not taking, they're so passionate about the idea. And I think this is true of any entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
so passionate about the idea that they don't take care of their own mental health. So there's become some awareness of that and how to take care of their own mental health. I think a roadblock has been what has been we've seen in state governments and in the federal government of how difficult it is to pass to pass a bill to regulate technology for youth safety.
Mm-hmm.
The Children's Online Safety Act has been just ever since I started this work, they've been trying to pass this bill. And so I think some of the roadblocks for the youth advocates is just keeping their spirits up,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think the tide is turning here. The recent finding of Meta with the young woman in LA and the fact that she won that case has set the stage, I think, for much more positive
Mm-hmm.
change there. Sort of unfortunate that we can't pass the bills, putting the pressure on the technology companies to pay damages for
Mm-hmm.
the harms that they have created. It's you can't deny it anymore. I mean, it used to be an argument, but I think ever since Frances Haugen, the Meta whistleblower,
Mm-hmm.
who revealed that Meta, Facebook had done their internal research and knew that 1 in 3 girls suffered from body image issues and eating issues from Instagram directly.
Mhm. Yeah, once that internal information was disclosed, there was didn't know.
Right.
Yeah, couldn't play that card anymore. And then in your business specifically in LookUp, are there any current speed bumps that you're dealing with as far as continuing to grow and evolve your business?
Yeah. Because so many organizations out there, big foundations, have taken on this issue,
Mm-hmm.
we're very comfortable with our lane, very comfortable with being the organization that gives seed grants. It would be great to be an inspiration for other youth organizations to do the same thing that we are doing. We feel that we tried once, I think we had 13 in our cohort. It was just too many. It was, and we've also tried we did 1 year globally, but the time differences made it impossible to bring everybody together. And part of
Mm-hmm.
it is bringing everybody together to work on things. So I think the speed bump we are working on is how to publicize to youth that this opportunity is there. And part of it is creating partnerships with the bigger foundations. I actually was able to be part of the first year of it's called the Responsible Technology Youth Power Fund. LookUp was able to be part of it. We weren't donating the same financial resources, but I was lucky enough to be on the steering committee because I had given grants to youth leaders before in this exact space. Creating more connections there for those foundations to let youth who aren't ready for their grants know about us, and then for them to know more, for the big foundations to know more about LookUp, which gives our grantees, as they're looking for more, that personal connection, because
Mm-hmm.
we all know that fundraising, a personal connection really helps. A really exciting thing that's happening is Young Futures. So there's the Responsible Technology Youth Power Fund, and then there's Young Futures. Young Futures being a youth digital wellness block party in Austin, May 13th to the 15th.
Okay.
So I am bringing a board member with me who's doing some strategy consulting, and very excited. First of all, I know many of these youth, and I know many of the funders, so that's really fun. But
Mhm.
I just think, right, and Young Futures has the financial resources to bring all these people together. So that's. I think I'll have a much different, energized, creative ideas on how to do our work. And it's a great way to wear our banner. This
Yeah.
is who we are. We're doing the same thing. You don't have to be established yet.
Hmm. Well, that's an exciting thing in the very near future coming up, just about a week away,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
yeah, that's amazing. Um, and as you're working with these young people who are creating these solutions, what are you seeing from them at this point that's giving you the most hope?
Ugh. They're Well, their desire to create a responsible digital world, their desire to make change, but also their belief in themselves that they can make change. I also think what's so fun to see is their camaraderie. And even if they haven't met in person, this is the power of LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is another social media promise and peril, right?
Mm.
Starting with the peril is all my friends have made it to VP, and that whole comparison, not about how you look and what you're wearing, but what
Status and
you're doing,
title.
your status and title, and what awards you've won. Just that there is it really is a movement,
Hmm.
and it isn't a solo movement. I almost think of it sort of like this hive of busy bees all working together, but able to come together at um, different events. The digital wellness movement is big, but also is the generalized youth mental health movement of youth leaders doing this work and representing. And the enthusiasm and the energy is very exciting. And the optimism that
Hmm.
they can make a difference, and you know that it's going to be okay.
What do you think that a healthier relationship with technology actually does look like in the future?
Well, obviously we have to use it, right?
It's here to stay.
Yeah, we have to use it. And I think it comes into that self-regulation in setting guardrails and boundaries up around yourself, and very difficult to do. I mean, I think, the whole notion of, well, students need phones, and we didn't talk about phones in schools, but the thought that students need phones in schools so they can learn to use them responsibly. No, they can do that outside of school. I think one of the most exciting things that has happened is the movement for no phones in schools. The bell to bell policy of, you leave it at the school, you leave it, the bell comes on to start school, you leave it there and you pick it up at the end. And the research is just coming out about that, but it's very, very promising.
And I've seen some, I don't remember if it was on 60 Minutes or some news channel, multiple times I've seen where they've interviewed these students at the very beginning, like, hey, we're going to implement this policy where you can't have your phone in school. And at first the kids are all like, but
Exactly.
the interesting thing is, I found two things very interesting. Is one is the people that actually had a bigger problem from what I saw were the parents
Yes.
not feeling like they could connect with their student all day long, but how much, well, every single kid, after a very short time, a week or so, liked it. They
Right.
liked it a lot. They liked not having their phones. And kind of going back to that very first conversation, the beginning of our conversation, where you said a girl came to you and she wanted to put her phone down, but it was going to be really hard because all of her friends were
Right.
still going to have their phones. So she was going to be the odd man out.
Right.
Well, if the entire school says no
Exactly.
phones, there's no odd man out.
There's no odd man out.
There's no,
Right.
and it makes it so much easier to do it. But every single student was like, it took the pressure off me. I felt less anxious. We talked during lunch. We weren't on our phones. We were, looking up at
Right.
each other. And so I think that the more we see that, that's going to encourage more schools, more kids to do that. It's going to tell the parents, hey, you guys need to back up a
Right.
little bit because this is so much better for your student. And if the hiccup is that you feel like you can't connect with your student, then really, who is this about?
Well,
And there's ways to connect with your student if you really need to, just like we did
Right,
back in the day. You can call the
right.
school. It's not off the grid.
Exactly.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm,
I know. And when I started, then I never thought that that would happen. And one of the
mhm,
things, because it wasn't a mandate, like I think Massachusetts just passed, it's a mandate. It's a state mandate, and state by state is doing this. But it was good cop, bad cop. So the
mhm.
teachers that were lax about it, then there was all sorts of struggles, right? Because you just couldn't. It was so hard to implement it.
Mhm,
And even phones in these, they walk into a classroom and put their phone in a shoe bag.
mhm.
There's this whole notion that if your phone is near you, it's impacting your cognitive and memory abilities, and the closer it is to you. But if you're sitting in your desk and you're looking over and your phone is in that pocket, it's still too close.
Yeah. Yeah. So, talking about schools and then bringing it back to AI, there was actually a woman. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Her name is Mackenzie Price. She started, I believe she calls them the Alpha Schools, and her Instagram is Future of Education. But she was a corporate woman, and her daughter was a bright girl, but really unhappy with school. And so Mackenzie said, I'm just going to start some schools. I'm going to start a school. And her premise was that kids could learn at their own pace so much better than trying to teach a group of 20 students who are all operating with different background, different ways of learning, and really tap into that. So her model is that the students don't actually have teachers, they have guides. They learn at their own pace. All of the actual academic part is done through AI learning. And when I first heard this, and even though I'm in the AI business, I was like, what does that mean? As I dug a little deeper, she has created a program where each student is operating at their level, and it may be different levels. Math may be different than English, may be different than social studies for their grade. But the AI component comes in that if a student is struggling to learn a concept, the AI component learns how they learn and teaches it to them in the way that speaks to their style of learning. And because it's so condensed, get almost all of their academics done in like 2 hours. And then the rest of the day is spent on life skills, and they get, 4 recesses. And the third grade class owns and operates an Airbnb. And to graduate, you actually have to start a company, and they walk you through this. And fourth graders have to give TED talks too. So I find that it seems to be a really brilliant intersection of taking the best of what this
Yeah.
can offer. But before we talk about all the great things that AI can do, which it can, let's go back a little bit to a few of the issues. We had talked earlier, and you mentioned that there's this whole new layer of complexity with AI for youth and mental health. And it's so important. That's what you're helping to bring awareness to. But these chatbot companions, deep fakes, this constant content. From your vantage point, what concerns you the most as far as youth and AI at this point?
What concerns me the most, well, it depends on the age, but across the board, to have a better friendship with AI, with
Mm-hmm.
AI entity than your own best friend is very, very scary, right? Because the more time you spend with an AI companion, whether it's Chat GPT, who's, trying to help you solve your emotional problems, or an actual AI, you know, companion. The danger really is losing that connection, not just to one person, but a group. So you lose that whole group mentality, and then being much more socially awkward and uncomfortable being in person and with other people, and it's riskier. So I think that's very scary. And I also think it's so easy to use AI for intellectual endeavors and challenges and puzzling things out. And I think if we're not careful, I think it's the same with anybody, right? Somebody could be completely unregulated on social media and use it all the time and not sleep and not think about it. And then others can be working towards more conscious use of it and boundaries. I think it's the same with AI, and in so many different ways. And We don't know what it's going to do to the brain. I mean, we were just talking about the speed of technology, how it's
Mhm.
pruning away neural pathways. What's AI going to do?
As you know, our company, Soaring Solutions, we help people in the health and wellness space, practitioners, if they're physicians, just anyone else in health and wellness. Maybe it's a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, growing a platform, coaching, it could be a product. And I always find the most personal satisfaction when we can give them AI solutions that take back their time, that reduce tedious tasks, that help systems talk to each other, that create things. And so, not only from a personal perspective does that give me satisfaction, but also from a business perspective, that's where we find our most success, is when it can actually reduce some of those things so that you can then get back to the human connection. And oftentimes, especially if I'm talking to a practitioner, for them, that even means just 2 or 3 more minutes in a room with a patient is a true gift for them at that point. But how do you see AI being then beneficial when we're talking about your cohort? So for you as a company, but then also for these young adults that you are helping navigate through this space.
I think some of the, it's the research that AI can do for you. So let's just use an example of a student who's finishing up our cohort and is teaching, younger students about ethical AI, and they're looking for more grants. I mean, the ability to just find what you're looking for, grants,
Mhm.
you have a specific task. I think for research, it's amazing. I think writing a brief, writing your paper, writing a creative story is very different, but doing that legwork of the research that you need in order to create a solution is really powerful. I also think the statistical analysis that we may have to do, it just that, I'm sure in every single business that is time saved, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's applying information that you get from AI. It's when we're losing the critical thinking that I'm so concerned about. Critical thinking to puzzle out, to create. But I think more and more that's going to come out. But the convenience of not thinking yourself and just letting AI think for you is more of the dangerous piece of it. Really early on when ChatGPT just came out, maybe it was 2022, a friend who's she's a professor in a business school, and she had them use ChatGPT to do all their research, and to synthesize. But then when they gave it, they didn't write a paper, they gave a presentation, um, and they were not allowed, they had no notes, and they gave some information, but then they had to field questions. So in the early days, it was the ingenuity of the teachers on how to use the AI as a learning tool, not have it write the 5 paragraph essay. Right.
Mhm.
I don't know. I know a lot of schools are using blue books again,
Mhm.
handwritten blue
Boy.
books.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's very interesting. We're so early. We're so
Yeah.
early in it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna look up Mackenzie Price and study that, because what they're doing away from the AI part, right,
That's the
is what
magic.
really, really innovative, creative schools do. And sometimes
Mhm.
the criticism of schools that are so experiential based is, this argument that students don't get the basics. So
Mhm.
the balance of this is fascinating.
Mhm.
I don't have an opinion about it. I mean,
Mhm.
I think it's the cost.
Yeah.
How do we educate an entire nation that way? I mean, what the cost is for a school like this.
If you could redesign how young people interact with technology from the start, what would you change first?
I would delay, 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 delay. And schools jumped in so fast, they're backpedaling out, right?
Mhm.
So, how do you be cautious with a business model that is seeking users, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Seeking users to spend more and more time on the technology. So, I think much, much later in life, kids don't need phones, and being more cautious. But, there are people out there who've tried to do this with AI, and they're up against the financial machine, right? Yeah.
How you mentioned a little bit about how you're currently using AI in your your business, if there was some other task that you could just hand over to it right now that you would love to take off your plate, what do you think that would be?
That be I think it would be research as well. And let's say, well, there's two focuses. When I'm thinking about working with youth, I think it would be the same thing to ask AI to go out there and find all the grants that our students would be eligible for and put in the current cohort and their 8 things. I think that would be really helpful to them and a way for us to support them as they graduate out and become an alumni. I think for me, I also speak to teachers in schools, and something like, what I was saying, for example, what are the statistical analysis of what are they finding with, schools that have banned, and have a bell to bell policy.
Mm-hmm.
So research like that, where something that I need to impart to somebody else, I think is really powerful.
Where do you see LookUp being in the next year, and then the broader vision 3-5 years down the road?
I know that's such a great question. That's what we're working on right now. We have a very generous donor. We have a wonderful endowment that we just got. And so spacing how we are investing that so that we can stay in the field
Mm-hmm.
for several more years. And what does it look like for us to go into more depth? I think one of the things that we don't have a very strong alumni program or an alumni options. So really zeroing in on what can we create as a next step for those students who, are going to stay with it,
Mm-hmm.
who are going to stay in the space and continue to make a difference.
Well, Susan, I think that what you're doing so important, so timely. I totally appreciate this conversation. I'm sure lots of people will too. I'm going to put all of your information in our show notes. But what's the best way for people to find out a little bit more about what you actually do? And then also specifically if a student is interested in tapping into and potentially being able to be part of your cohort and receive one of these grants, what's
Yeah.
the path they should take?
So the two is just Susan at lookup.live. It was lookup and live. I mean, really, it was lookup and com, org, net, everything was taken. So,
Right.
and especially lookup because it was all about the yellow, when we had yellow and white pages. So Susan at lookup.live and just lookup.live. But we don't open our grant application process till September.
Okay.
So I would have somebody just reach out directly to me, really say, I'm a student interested in, applying for a grant in September. Will you put me on the list? Making that personal connection. And actually, it gives me a really good idea. I have to go back and look at our website and see if you can get on the list to get information when the applications open in September. That's actually a wonderful idea.
Good. Well, good. Well, hopefully any young adult that's listening to this that has is already, like you said, some of them are already down the road a little ways at this point, but some of them it's just something whirling around in their brain. You certainly can help lead them down that path and oftentimes on to continuing it.
Absolutely.
Onto things that have an even larger impact. So I think what you're doing is really amazing, and there's so much more to be done. As quickly as this evolves, it seems like you're aware of that and trying to keep pace with that.
Yep.
Trying to keep up. I know, I'm in this space and it's truly impossible to stay ahead. My goal is just to try and, I said, keep my head above water, do the dog paddle and keep my head above water because it is changing so fast. But it's so wonderful where you have an organization like yours that's really creating this balance, that's drawing so much awareness to, like you said, it's the promise and the peril. And it's not going anywhere. So how can we be intentional and guard it and use it for the best of what it is and set aside the things that don't have a positive impact on that? So thank you very much, Susan. Appreciate your time and the conversation today.